ParaNormal with Dr. Yana and Dr. Elliot, where science meets the unexpected, where we delve deep into the mysteries that straddle the line between scientific inquiry and paranormal. Get ready for a mind-altering journey as we embark on this phenomenal discovery together on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. That went on a little bit too long. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are live, as always, on Tuesdays. I can hear myself. What is going on here?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me repeating myself?
No, I just hear you. Are you getting an echo of you there?
Okay, so I am back and hopefully everything is going to be okay.
Everything is going to be okay, I'm sure of it.
Yes. That was an echo. No, I'm hearing myself.
I'm just hearing you. You sound normal to me.
Okay, well, today we are going to be talking about psychedelics and dreams with our fantastic guest, Robert Mitchell. Robert, could you introduce yourself and tell us your connection with psychedelics?
Yeah. Well, I have about a 30-year practice with psychedelics, maybe longer. I had the good fortune when I went to graduate school in the early 90s. I went to a place called the California Institute of Integral Studies. And at the California Institute of Integral Studies at the time, there were a lot of psychedelic pioneers who had done extensive psychedelic research in the 50s and 60s and 70s, mostly with LSD. And they were kind of like Vietnam vets. They were a little bit like the war's over and we lost, but this all works. And in the Bay Area, there were also a lot of underground therapists at the time who were working with MDMA and psychedelics. And I had the good fortune of working with a couple of those people as a client. And once I got trained as a therapist, I got my master's degree and I did a lot of clinical hours. I was able to work with people using psychedelics. Like I was able to sort of guide them through their experience so that they would be able to have positive outcomes. I'd educate them about it. I'd help them integrate the experience afterwards. And it's just been a healing modality that's been incredibly, it's had a lot of efficacy for a long time. And I've had the good fortune of knowing how to help people have positive experiences with it. And so I've been doing it and funnily enough, it's become a thing over the past, 7 or 8 years where it's become a thing where it's much less marginalized in the culture. People are a lot more interested in it. And there's a lot more science. What's that?
And you started at the time before it became so widespread.
Oh, yeah. Well, people were always like, you're doing what? You're interested in what? Like that it was kind of like crazy. And then I think in 2017 or 2018, Michael Pollan's book came out, How to Change Your Mind, and was a New York Times bestseller. And it was basically all about psychedelics and psychedelic therapy. And the thing about psychedelic therapy is in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there were 10,000 academic papers written about how successful LSD therapy was.
Stan Grof was doing a huge research.
Yeah, Stan Grof. Stan Grof was one of my professors at CIIS.
Yes.
That's
fantastic.
Right. Yeah, he was one of my professors at CIIS, along with Ralph Metzner, who was at Harvard with Timothy Leary and Ram Dass. And then also Michael Harner was there, who he wrote The Way of the Shaman. And he'd gone down to the Amazon in like 1962 and done ayahuasca with I think it was the Yabaro. And so they were all extensive. And then there were also all these therapists in the Bay Area who were using MDMA in therapy at the time as well. And it was before it was a party drug. You know, it was sort of, that's who was using it first, was therapists in the Bay Area. So I was in San Francisco living in the Haight, and there was just all this psychedelic stuff going on around me, even though it was like 1991 when I got there. But there were all these people who were working with it and educating about it. And now,
But I can remember that it was banned, and Stan Grof had to use yeah, he was working on holotropic breathing in order to induce similar experiences.
Yeah.
Did you also do that?
You know, I did a couple workshops with that. You know, I know that's what Stan noticed, that when people were having psychedelic experiences, when they were having peak experiences, they breathed a certain way. Holotropic breathing is what he called it. And so when it became, you know, no longer legally sanctioned to use psychedelics, and you know, the reason for that is interesting. It's good to know because, you know, psychedelics as a therapy used clinically are extremely safe, you know, and most people in the 1950s, you know, they were going to their psychiatrist's office in a coat and tie, you know, and doing like years before Timothy Leary knew anything about psychedelics, and it became kind of recreationalized in the culture. You know, like Cary Grant did 100 LSD sessions in a coat and tie in his psychiatrist's office in Beverly Hills, and wrote an extensive article about it in Life magazine in 1958.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there's a great article. It's online. It's a Vanity Fair article called "Cary in the Sky with Diamonds," and it's all about Cary Grant's LSD therapy and how Hollywood was using it in the 1950s, and you know, housewives in Hollywood and movie stars and all that sort of stuff. But there was no kind of mythology of bad trips, or you know, there were no hippies. It was kind of like Mad Men, you know, people doing their LSD therapy.
How interesting. They would go like Mad Men, right? Yeah,
it was like Mad Men. Yeah, it was like that's really what it was like, and it's a funny aesthetic, but that's how most of the research with it was done. And then when it became kind of democratized and recreationalized in the culture in the 1960s, and it became part of the counterculture, it was fueling the counterculture, and it was fueling the anti-war movement. And so Richard Nixon made it a Schedule I drug, you know, so that college kids couldn't. He thought it would stop them from protesting the war, and that was really the only reason. It had nothing to do with the efficacy of it or the success of it, or you know, it's kind of like people using psychedelics and like running around San Francisco or running around New York is like trying to do therapy when you're running around those places. You know, it doesn't work. You know, that's where a lot of the trouble with psychedelics comes in, is when people use them in suboptimal situations. But in an optimal situation where you have empathic bonds with the people who you're working with, and you're cutting off the conditioning that you're usually having or you've had your whole life, there's a universe that emerges within that is very safe to encounter, you know. And
is this how you're helping people that come to you with various problems?
You know, I work with people in a variety of modalities. You know, the interesting thing about psychedelics is that psychedelics happen in the same part of your brain where dreaming happens. And also meditation does the same thing to your brain that psychedelics do. So if you look at the brain of a monk who's been meditating deeply for 40 years in deep meditation on a CAT scan or MRI, and then you look at a brain that's having a psychedelic experience, they look identical. Because what happens is the brain becomes very quiet. It doesn't become super active. That's what people think it would happen, but the usual chatter stops. And so the brain starts to communicate with parts of the brain that are usually kind of camouflaged by activity. And that's what synesthesia is, where you like hear colors and, you know, taste sounds and stuff like that. It's because parts of the brain that usually have a freeway going between them, that freeway stops, it drops down, and then the brain goes, oh, you can do this, and oh, you can do that. Same thing with deep meditation. So to me,
But the senses overlap, yes.
yeah, to me, so I always say to people that meditation is psychedelics in slow motion. You know, you can do it every day, and you know you can function, and it's always going to deepen. And then dreaming, I feel like the same symbolic process, the same unconscious symbolic process that emerges in our dream life emerges in psychedelic experiences. It's subjective, and it has its own language, and it has its own intelligence. And what I assist people with is creating a dialogue with that part of themselves, you know, and I use all those modalities, you know, and yeah, people are interested in psychedelics, you know. But I always say to people, if you take somebody who has a psychedelic experience, and their experiences, they spent 10,000 years under a waterfall of white light of God's love in their experience, and then you take another person who had a very difficult time with difficult memories or difficult recalls or unprocessed traumas. If the person who had the difficult time meditates every day for 6 months, they're going to get way more out of the experience than the person who had this incredible mystical experience. You know, so you
So,
have to.
do you use, from the psychedelics that we're talking about, do you use psilocybin, which is found in so-called magic mushrooms?
Yeah, psilocybin. Okay, so and psilocybin and LSD are very similar in the way that they function, and they work on the same neuroreceptor. It's the 5H2A, the 5H2TA. Like the only real difference between LSD, which also comes from a fungus, it comes from a fungus that grows on wheat, and the only real difference is that psilocybin much more structurally resembles serotonin than LSD does. So when you use psilocybin, it goes through your neuroreceptors like serotonin does, and the experience lasts from 4 to 6 hours. With LSD, it's not as permeable to the neuroreceptor, and it kind of sits on it for a while, and it kind of lasts twice as long. So all of the studies that were done in the 50s and 60s and 70s were with mostly LSD. And then there's such a cultural association with LSD now, right? It's acid, you know, there's all these like freak out stories from the 60s and all that sort of stuff. And they basically do the same thing. But yes, psilocybin, it lasts less long, and it's in magic mushrooms. It's in psilocybin mushrooms. Yeah.
So
That's
it's
it's a very, go ahead.
5HC2A, and
Yeah.
also the default mode network, DMN, which research shows that psychedelics decrease activity in DMN, a brain network essentially associated with the self-referential thought and the ego.
Mm-hmm.
So when this decrease in thought, it leads essentially to a dissolution of the ego and increase in sensory and emotional experiences. And then they often described as visions. So how does this experience relate to dreams per se? Because
Oh,
we see
okay.
visions while we are in the semi-conscious state, right? I cannot really say that we're in conscious state, in a semi-conscious state. But how does it relate to dreams themselves when we are
Yeah.
asleep
You
at
know,
night?
I have a philosophy about that I'll explain, which is basically what I think that psychedelics do is, from the moment you or I or any listener is born, our nervous system branches out from our brain and says, this is reality. This is if I act like this, people like me. If I act like this, they don't. You know, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. This is how I feel safe. This is how I feel unsafe. And it begins to condition your brain. You know, it's like using the 8 freeway or whatever, or the 5 all the time, right? And Jung thought that we were dreaming all the time, but that when we slept, our egoic threshold was lowered and we became aware of the process, right? And the way that psychedelics are like dreams is the proper kind of therapeutic way to use psychedelics is not it's not seeing the Grateful Dead in Las Vegas. What it is people wear eye shades and they wear earphones that mostly play classical music, and they lie down. And so what they basically do is you kind of induce the same experience that you induce when you fall asleep. You shut down the normative nervous system that gets you walking around and thinking and reading the news on CNN or Fox or whatever it is that someone listens to. And what happens is the unconscious emerges. What you are, we're all sort of like this, right? We're all sort of like this. There's Robert and there's Yana just trying to get through their day and pay their taxes and get to their appointments on time. And then there's all this stuff that's us too. And what psychedelics do, just like dreaming does, is it kind of goes like that and goes, here's other parts of you that are operating outside of that minimal awareness that you're using to just function as a human being. I think that Aldous Huxley, I can't remember his exact description, but he thought that like your ego was like a funnel of consciousness, that is screening out a lot of things. And oftentimes with psychedelics or with dreaming, when that kind of opens, you find out there are more things going on with you than you realize, and most people are functioning within that small nozzle a lot. And it's the things that are outside the nozzle of awareness that are causing them difficulties, or it can be something as simple as they don't function in joy. They're not aware of their joy. I mean, that's one example of something that people experience where their aperture opens up and they experience all this joy that they've been screening out pretty much their entire life because they've been working so hard or they've been so goal-oriented, but also outside that normative aperture, there can be traumatic memories that aperture doesn't allow in because it interferes with their operating in their day-to-day experience. And when they let that in, it can be difficult, but it can be really healing because they become aware of the things that are causing them anxiety or the things that are causing them depression. And that's really, dreaming does the same thing night after night after night after night. If you tend to those dreams and you develop a dialogue with the intelligence that creates them and learn its language, it will inform you of things that your daytime consciousness is excluding.
Well, most of the time we completely dismiss that. Whatever we see in our dreams, we dismiss it, and only rarely that people will be recording their dreams in order to understand how their soul is talking to them.
I would say I would love the audience. I always say this because when I worked as a sort of more conventional therapist, when I was going through internships and stuff, I always wanted to work with clients' dreams, and people would say, I don't dream. I don't remember my dreams. And I would say, okay, well, what you need to do is you need to get yourself a really nice book and a really nice pen. Spend some money, get nice leather, Italian leather, and put it next to your bed. And then just write down the first thing that you remember when you wake up in the morning. And every single person would come in the next week going, oh my God, what did you do to me? And because, Jung said that if you turn towards the unconscious, it turns back towards you twice as strong. And so if a person makes a place for their dreams and they make the ritual, they make the yoga of waking up and writing down their dreams, it is like a yoga. You become better at it. You become better at the recall, and you become better at learning the language because it's not like the language we're speaking now.
It is a symbolic language, of course,
Yeah.
and the Jung was talking about it, that the soul is talking to you in the dreams. And at the same time, he emphasized the importance of those symbols. And what's good about it is that we may and we can record our own dreams to understand and sort of to track it retrospectively in order to understand what is going on. Jung had done an enormous amount of research into, of course, the dream studies through the archetypal perspective. And he was also, while he was doing that research, that he understood that a lot of unconscious content comes up.
Yeah.
And it is important to have to do this research with someone else. You have to go in that in couples, essentially, not the couples, romantic couples, but with someone else in order to do the reality check. So, uh, do you think that when people do the psychedelic therapy per se,
Mhm.
do you think that they need to be always doing that with a professional in order to understand the unconscious content that comes up? Or do you think that people can be doing that on their own, and if they're strong enough, they can deal with it?
Well, I think people can do it on their own without it being dangerous. You know, like I also think that there's a lot of indiscriminate, uninformed, fake mythology about using psychedelics that's really problematic. I don't think actually that there's any better way to do psychedelics than in a therapeutic dyad. You know, like I think that having somebody there who knows you, who's invested in you, who you trust, who you feel safe with, who's invested time and energy in getting to know you, who you feel you have a empathic bond with, that is the safest, most productive way to do psychedelics. And I can't tell you how many people I've worked with who think they've had this big revelation during their psychedelic experience, like about their family or about their sexuality or about their work or about how they're living. And they come out of the experience and they're like, I am ready to change everything. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's not change anything now. Let's really examine the experience as a subjective experience that's communicating something to you. You're not a shaman. You don't need to leave your wife. You don't need to become part of a, you don't need to become gay if you've never been gay. You don't need to leave your family and move to the Amazon. It's like you just have to keep people, like you have to keep people exploring the experience like it's a dream and not literalizing it, because literalizing it is the biggest mistake that people make with psychedelics. Is
Yeah,
that
because there are similarities with psychedelics and, of course, in dreams, like altered perception, right? The
oh
emotional intensity.
yeah,
And also, we have to think about that the narrative structure, that the dreams often have narrative or storyline, and psychedelic experiences can also similarly unfold like a story-like manner, in which you're saying that it is very subjective. Of course, what we are seeing during those visions, it is very subjective.
it's completely subject. It's as subjective as dreaming is. One of the things that people talk about with like DMT, which is also uses the same neuroreceptor as with ayahuasca. Um, it's the same neuroreceptor that LSD and psilocybin use. Is they talk about aliens. They encounter alien intelligence, and I'm just like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is really just some part of yourself that you're unfamiliar with. It's not, you're not getting in touch with aliens. It's some figure in your unconscious, and have a dialogue with it and see what it wants. Don't run around and tell people that you had contact with aliens during your psychedelic experience. Because if I dream, it's like me dreaming last night that I was on a spaceship and waking up in the morning and calling all my friends and telling them about
Well,
that.
a lot of people do. They have one experience that is so peculiar that they have just one experience and then they write books about it and books and books
Right.
around one single experience, while it is possible that the experience can be an objective reality when a few people share the same experience. Like, for
Well,
example, in ayahuasca, they
uh-huh.
see this big python, big
Right.
snake,
Yeah, everyone sees a snake. Yep.
which is a part of it, of course. And that could be something that could be considered the objective reality, but the most of the time it is subjective and it could be only meaningful to you. Have you encountered a completely bizarre encounters that people would share with you after undergoing this therapy?
You mean an encounter with some other kind of entity
With
or
entities, also, entities could also be a part of their own psyche and, of course, represented in a way of some entities that I see. So,
you
what
know,
was the. Mhm.
I always educate the people I work with before their experiences that really what they're going to encounter is themselves. And they're going to encounter parts of themselves that maybe they've never encountered before. Yeah, I've had people say, like, I've had people say, okay, so they're really excited. They'll say, okay, I didn't just experience the design of the universe. Like I experienced like the architectural foundation of all of reality, but I actually came in contact with the designers.
Mm, mm.
And I'll be that's really great. But more likely than not, that is some part of you. That's some part of you that is kind of a archetypal part of you that's a part of the design of your life. And I think that with ayahuasca and stuff like that, with everybody experiencing snakes, people hear about snakes, or they're in the Amazon where there are snakes, and what people experience in those processes visually is, a matrix of colors that are moving and, flowing. That's what people experience with psychedelics with their eyes closed. They do that with psilocybin as well. And if they want to call it a snake, they can call it a snake. It's the topography of their unconscious. And one of the things about ayahuasca also is people have what's called a participation mystique, which is something that was, I think it was Levi Strauss. He was an anthropologist. Like a participation mystique is that if everybody goes to a Padres game in San Diego and they feel like they're all rooting for the Padres, they feel like they're helping, or the same thing at a Yankee game. And so when people get together and they do group psychedelics, they feel like we're all here and we're all here to have mystical experiences and we're all here to experience snakes, and then that's what happens, but really it's
This
really
is the
more,
Strassman you're talking about.
is it?
Strassman and
Oh,
DMT, the spirit molecule,
yeah,
or.
it's not Rick Strassman. The participation mystique is from anthropology. It's not. It's not.
Mhm.
It's not Rick Strassman. But in these ayahuasca ceremonies, you get 15, 20 people, and they're all trying to row the same way. They're all trying to have a mystical experience with pythons and and Mama Ayahuasca. There's this TED talk by this guy Graham Hancock, he's kind of a psychedelicist, and he talks about the pyramids, and he talks about lost civilizations in the Amazon, and his TED talk is about how he was a very big marijuana smoker, and when he did ayahuasca, Mama Ayahuasca told him to stop smoking so much marijuana. And my response to that is like, yeah, his mother could have told him that too. If we have that kind of relationship. But we want to think that there's a Mama Ayahuasca, who's this infinite feminine intelligence that we're encountering. But
Well,
it's some
it
internalized part of ourselves.
it could be some archetypal part of ourselves, because I remember with one client that came to me with a particular problem that she was experiencing, and she asked me for help. So I meditated and I saw a particular vision, and what's so peculiar about it is that I knew nothing about ayahuasca at the time,
Mhm.
and I was doing still work with people, and I would, as a seer, I would be able to see where their problems are coming from. And I made a drawing. It was such a bizarre drawing to me because I thought, okay, like some sort of the archetypal entity here, and
Uh-huh.
probably something out of my imagination because it doesn't ring any bell. And I did not know what it was. And when I asked what it was, when I was doing my own spiritual research, doing the archetypal password of the situation and of the person's problems, what happened in fact that I got the letters and I wrote down the letters of the ayahuasca. In fact, I was able to write them down, but I knew nothing even how to pronounce it. And the funny thing about it is that that client of mine was speaking Russian, and I tried to explain that to her in Russian language. And in Russian, it has a very funny connotation. And I said, you know what, I can't even pronounce it because it's has a bad meaning to that.
Wow.
So when I pronounced that, she said, "No, no, no. This is ayahuasca. What you're referring to, and the entity that you drew is a Mother Aya, in fact." And I knew
Oh,
nothing about it. So for
okay.
me, that was an objective reality when other people have already known about it, and somehow archetypally it was already existing in some sort of a reality that I was able to tap into.
Right.
But I was able to see that, and I was able to even get the name of this experience, and that helped her a lot. So, what do you think of that?
Well, I think probably, you're probably sensitive to her unconscious. I think you probably have a permeable and powerful unconscious, and that, that's what happens between people in therapeutic relationship is that is their unconscious is in exchange. Their unconscious is in intercourse. And I think that's what Jung thought was healing about analysis was it's your unconscious in intercourse with the other person's unconscious that where the healing happens. You know, I have to say, um, psilocin and DMT, which DMT is what's in ayahuasca, and psilocin is what psilocybin gets metabolized as, are molecularly identical. They're exactly the same molecule, except psilocin has an extra hydroxine leg on it, which allows it to not be broken down in your gut. So if you eat psilocybin, the psilocin goes through your blood-brain barrier. There's DMT in peppers and citrus and a variety of vegetables and fruits, but your stomach breaks it down so you don't have a psychedelic experience. And what ayahuasca is, the vine is an MAOI inhibitor. And the MAOI inhibitor keeps the DMT from being broken down in your gut so that it goes into your brain. And I don't think that topographically there's any difference between psilocybin and ayahuasca.
So
I
that
don't
is essentially the vine that is used in the
the vine,
experience.
yeah, the vine that's the vine of souls, it doesn't have anything psychedelic in it. The viridis plant, which has a DMT, it looks like flowers. It's not as dynamic looking as the vine that has as the ayahuasca vine. And so much of ayahuasca use is about creating a mythology around that. Like people vomit from ayahuasca, and the reason that they vomit is because the brew is incredibly acidic. And so if people don't tolerate acidic, they'll vomit and they'll have diarrhea. I did it 7 or 8 times and I never got sick. I was curious. It was like anthropology. And it's because I just tolerate, I, I, I tolerate the acidness. And I would look at the guy and it was like Shipibo and he'd been doing it for generations. And I'd look at him and say like, when's the vomiting part start? And he'd be like, next time I'll bring the chocolata from my village, and everybody vomits from the chocolata. And I drink it, and I never got sick. And I found the topography of ayahuasca and the topography of high dosage psilocybin to be completely identical. Like, and I feel like a lot of ayahuasca is showbiz. It's the Icaros, it's the people are vomiting in buckets, but they're vomiting in buckets because they don't tolerate the acidity. And then it's supposed to be La Purga, and you're getting out the bad spirits and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think that there's any difference between high dose, like parallel dosages between psilocybin and DMT that you get in ayahuasca. I'm a big ayahuasca apostate because I've done both. And I know that the researchers at Johns Hopkins and at NYU, they feel the same. You know, they feel like it's the same unconscious process, that they catalyze the same experience. But there's this whole economy built for ayahuasca. So people want to go and they want to be in the Amazon, they want to drink and they want to vomit, they want to see pythons. But all those things are exactly the same in psilocybin at similar dosages. And
I know that some people's destinies have completely changed, and actually also the personalities have changed as well. Some people that were really outgoing, going to the parties and interested in certain foods, like being like party animals and enjoying life, all of a sudden became really secluded, as if they have understood the wisdom of life itself. And they steered away from partying. They adopted a completely different way of eating and acquired new interests and changed the jobs even.
yeah, that can happen with any psychedelic because, first of all, I think one of the great quotes from Jung is be suspicious of any unearned wisdom. And one of the things about these experiences is their valence is going to open into their unconscious. And, we live in our religion in this culture is secular materialism. It's that if we do well and we're successful, the favor of God is revealed in our success.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And, Trump is the avatar of that, and so when people do psychedelics, just like when they're dreaming, they're stepping out of that shared convention and they're going to experience parts of themselves and ways of knowing themselves that they may have never experienced before, especially if they're secular materialists, especially if they don't have a religious life. Jung said that all psychological problems are religious problems, and people's religion is really what they spend their day doing. That's really what they spend their day doing. So if their business is what they're doing from the time they wake up to the time they fall asleep, like that's their religion. And if they encounter their unconscious, or they encounter archetypal forces in their psychedelic experiences, it is going to shake them. It's going to shake their understanding of what their lives are about. And it can be quite a dangerous thing in that way. And people have to be able to ground the experience in their real life. I always say to people that you need to get actionable intelligence from your experience that you're going to be able to plant in your life afterwards. And don't ever throw out the baby with the bathwater with what you learned during your psychedelic experiences. like you've been you for 40 years or 50 years or 30 years, that stay with that momentum, let it affect you, but don't let it overthrow, don't let the chaos of the experience overthrow your whole governing body, because
yes,
it's so new and so radical.
I'm so glad that you have mentioned that because for a lot of people, it is such a new experience that they think it's like a revelation from God and this is what it is and nothing but this. And those people who never believed in God, somehow they start believing because of those experiences, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, those experiences also have nothing to do with reality. And people also change their lives completely based on one single experience. And what I also noticed that a lot of people, as soon as they see something in a parallel universe, somewhere in the visions or in the dreams, some other parallel reality, or maybe interdimensional, maybe between
Right.
the planets, interplanetary reality, they take it as the truth itself
Yeah.
without questioning it. And they are such powerful creatures and entities and intelligent forces that cannot be just taken, I would say, realistically as they are on that moment. Because they could also be, like you mentioned, a part of yourself, and you have to be dealing with yourself and not some other external entity that is talking to you.
Yeah. It's, it is, these are very, very powerful tools. Psychedelics can be very powerful, and they have to be understood, and the experiences need to be interpreted, and they need to be interpreted wisely. And people need to be circumspect about their psychedelic experience, just like they need to be circumspect about their dreams. And they have to think about the long game of their life. They have to think, like, you can have a psychedelic experience. I could have a psychedelic experience. Anybody here could have a psychedelic experience that they could, Jung thought that a dream was a living thing. And a dream you had 10 years ago was still a part of nature. And you could return to it and do active imagination with it and still get information from it, even though you had it in 2014. And psychedelic experiences are like that as well. A person can mine information from their psychedelic experience for weeks and months and years, which is why people don't need to do a lot of psychedelics. They don't need to do psychedelics often. I had this Zen teacher who was also a psychologist who I sat with for 10 years. And he said he was interested in my use of psychedelics and my work with them. And he had been in the 60s, and he was a Zen priest at Zen Center, LA. And he was talking to me about it. And he said, the thing about psychedelics is that they can be a doorway, but they can also
Mhm.
become a revolving doorway. And people get into the otherness of the experience.
That's a great way to put it. Mhm.
Yeah. And what they don't realize is that, well, I was saying, people should, there's a good saying, is that you don't need to do more psychedelics. You need to be more psychedelic. And being more psychedelic is really about engaging the parts of your consciousness that are outside of your everyday conditioning. And you can do that with dream work. You can do that with meditation. You can do that by paying attention to synchronicities. There's so many ways. You need to be aware that psychedelic experience that was so profound and so rich and so alive and so obvious in the moment that you had it is alive all around you. It was alive around you before you did it, and it's alive around you after you do it. And you need to notice that, and you really need to connect to that. And you don't need to do more psychedelics. Like I've done, I recently had a psychedelic experience like 6 months ago, and it had been 4 or 5 years since I've had a psychedelic experience because there was so much going on in my life that I was engaged with. And I still have things that I draw on old psychedelic experiences. I still draw on them, just like I draw on dreams that I had 20 years ago. People need to not um, fetishize psychedelics, because all it is consciousness. It's a way that people catalyze an awareness of their consciousness. It is not consciousness itself. And there's so much psychedelic fetishism in the culture with ayahuasca and mushrooms,
Mhm.
DMT and 5-MeO and aliens. And all people are becoming aware of is that they have a consciousness that originates before, that is primary in their experience. And most of the time they're screening that out because they're just trying to get what they want.
So they're looking for something and they're finding it. But the important aspect here is that the pineal gland also produces DMT.
Right.
And
Endogenous DMT, yeah.
DMT, right? Like you mentioned, that it's found in plants, right, and produced endogenously in small amounts in human body. In
Right.
small amounts, perhaps before we were producing that in larger quantities. Although I don't know how many millions back we have to go back, millions of years that we have to go back, because for the entire history that we know of, people have been experiencing and uh, psychedelics, and we know about the research on dreams and in mythology, of course, and people have been wanting to know. They wanted to have the altered state of consciousness to understand something more that they already know, right? And that is the endogenous DMT production, right? Because, like we mentioned, some researchers like Rick Strassman, right? He hypothesized that the pineal gland can be responsible for producing DMT. And
Right.
what he wrote in his book DMT, the spirit molecule, and that is responsible for dreaming and mystical
Yeah.
states.
And also they think that people's near death experiences, they also think that's a result of endogenous DMT release. That people are under so much stress that their pineal gland releases DMT. That's one of the theories about near death experiences as well.
Yeah, with near-death experiences, that's a very interesting topic on itself.
Yeah.
But then if we're speaking of the dream psychedelics and dreams, and that represents the raw consciousness, right? There is also the influence on melatonin. So our
Mm.
pineal gland produces melatonin, and this is how we are able to sleep. And sometimes melatonin is produced in larger quantities than it's supposed to.
Mm.
And perhaps that is there's a connection between uh, larger quantities of melatonin and DMT, perhaps. What do you think?
I think it's possible. I've worked with people. I've worked with people who have problems sleeping. That's
Hmm.
something that people have worked with psychedelics with. And there's always a physiological corollary for consciousness. And there if something's happening in someone's consciousness, there's going to be a way to measure it physiologically in the brain, either with neurochemistry or with how neurons are firing. And when I work with people who have problems sleeping, usually the problems that they have sleeping are a result of unconscious conflict. And if they can resolve that in their psychedelic experiences or in their dreams, they sleep better. And I'm sure that there's some way to evaluate that with their melatonin levels, like that there could be studies about that, where I think that anxiety probably suppresses melatonin. That'd be my guess.
What
And
about too much melatonin?
too much?
Too much melatonin, but when people sleep for
Oh,
longer
too
periods
much?
of time,
You
those
know?
are also sleep disorders.
Yeah.
But people sleep too much. So it's my understanding that there is a connection with DMT and melatonin. That is a fascinating topic. Um, why some of us can see more than others
Yeah.
without even delving into psychedelics.
I think here's what I think. So I'm somebody who dreams a lot. Like I've recorded 8,000 of my dreams. And I think it's the complete same realm of consciousness that psychedelics is. Like it's the same unconscious intelligence that presents itself in your dreams presents itself during psychedelic experiences. And I know that if people dream a lot, I have a sense of what the ease of their psychedelic experience, because it's such a similar realm, if not the same realm. you know, almost to the point where I would say that psychedelics are like a catalyzed lucid dream, you know, and there's a one-to-one relationship between people's dreaming life and their psychedelic life. So if people don't work with their dreams, if they're not aware of their dreams, if they don't recall their dreams, then their psychedelic experiences tend to be more dramatic and shocking. Just like a bad dream will warn you that there's something going on that you're not paying attention to. You know, like that's usually what a bad dream is that there's something going on in your life that you're not paying attention to, you're not listening to. So it goes, boo, you know, pay attention to this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so if people already have those pathways in their dreaming, if they have an awareness of their dreaming, if they have a capacity for dreaming, they're going to have the same capacity for psychedelic experience. They're going to be comfortable in the psychedelic experience, like it's going to be familiar to them, like their dreaming is. I'm certain of it, and it's why I think the psychedelic experience it's not as unique as people think it is. You know, it's a capacity that people have, and the molecules in whatever particular psychedelic they're using give them access to these states of consciousness. But that's what the psychedelics do. Whatever it is, even if it's MDMA, it's giving you access to a state of consciousness which is usually outside your normative state, but it's always there.
Well, then that brings me to the next question.
Okay.
So what is the good trip then, and what is the bad trip, and why do people have bad trips?
Okay, well, that's really good. That's such a good question. I have like a two-tiered answer to that. Therapeutically, like working in a therapeutic environment, there is no such thing as a bad trip. There are hard trips, and hard trips can be the best trips. Hard trips can be like, you know, I've worked with people who their psychedelic experience was recalling being molested by a family member when they were a child, and they didn't have any memory of it. And it was an esteemed member of their family, and they'd been depressed their whole life. And when it came to them, it was so frightening and so overwhelming and so kind of paradigm shifting about their life. And they were so upset about it, but it gave them the reason for their fear and for their depression. It made them realize what it was. And then they could work with that in therapy. You know, they could reshape their history from that experience. And to me, that was invaluable because they'd done all kinds of therapy. I can't tell you how many times that's happened to people who've been in therapy for 20, 30 years, and they haven't gotten to that. And they think they're having a bad trip. And to me, it's like a boil coming up and getting out the impurities. It's fantastic. Now, there is a bad trip, like a cultural bad trip, which is you take mushrooms, you take LSD, and you're with friends, and things become really dark and scary and frightening. And that's something else. Look, Jung had this notion of the daemon, you know, of the spirit that looks after us. And all of us have these moments where there's kinds of abuse, there's lack of empathy for the deepest parts of ourselves. Everybody has that. You know, like most people, the parents that raise them don't have the capacity to reflect the deepest and most profound parts of themselves. And that is a very lonely and frightening experience to have, even if your parents are good people, you know, but that's a very human experience. That's how you know you're a human being, because you suffer that way. But Jung thought that there was this daemon, this spirit, that you're alive, I'm alive, we were grown up, we got through that, right? Like we got through that and we made good decisions. And the daemon is very, very, very suspicious of psychedelic experience. And if something's going to come up that it's not the time and place, that's going to be devastating for the person, that part of the psyche would much rather that you feel frightened and shut down and that you experience dread and terror than that you have this thing happen in this environment that's not safe, around these people you don't really know, that you can't really be intimate with, and it shuts it down. I'm 100% sure that's a bad trip. Like that's happened since the 1960s. You know, I've talked to 100 people who've had that experience, but I've never had it happen with somebody in a therapeutic experience. Never had it happen. I don't believe it's possible. And like I said, people can have hard trips, but those are the best trips because that can give them the best information about the source of their suffering. You know,
So this
like,
is essentially the unconscious processes. They go out of their way, right? That they were stored somewhere, swept
yeah,
under the rug, and then somehow they get a chance to show up, essentially, and rule the memory, rule the head, the brain for a period of time. And in hypnotherapy, we call it an abreaction when it happens.
uh-huh.
But nevertheless, this is the exposure therapy that we're talking about, exposure to the phobias, exposure to the past traumas, to
Yeah.
relieve certain experiences in order to be healed. And there are also psychological research done on dreams that people who dreamt about their past traumatic experiences, they were able to overcome them
Oh yeah, I
on a
think
conscious state versus that group of people that did not dream of their experiences or the traumatic experiences. So this is interesting because we must be able to pay attention to our dreams.
I think, I've had, like I said, I've recorded 8,000 dreams over like 30 years, 35 years. And I wish they were all a lot more fun. I wish they were all like rainbows and crystal ships and all that sort of
Well, this
stuff.
is all our culture is all about to have
Yeah, but
fun, right?
they're all, here's the thing, and it's the most important quote about all of this work, whether it's dreams or psychedelics. My favorite quote from Jung, the most important quote of Jung, especially because of the culture we live in, is we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. We become enlightened by illuminating our darkness. And that's why dreams are hard. That's why most dreams are difficult. They're about unpleasant things. They're about the shit in your life, and they're about the difficulty in your life, and they're about unresolved conflict. And psychedelic use can be the same. Like if you take psychedelics and what you get from it is that God's chosen me to be a shaman, like that's probably not a good thing. If you have an experience and it unearths this lost relic of suffering, and I've had that happen, and it can be the most healing thing. And I think everybody wants things to be light and fun and easy and change things like that. I'll go down to the Amazon and take ayahuasca and I'll come back a different person.
And
you know
also, Jung was saying that there is no way to come into yourself but through suffering.
yeah, that's how you understand that you're human, I think, is through your suffering.
There's not one single human being, or at least I have never met one that never had any suffering in life or some sort of hardship, of course, on their own personal levels. But nevertheless, we all hold some sort of a trauma, unless we were all completely shielded from this world. And of course, the trauma would uh, appear when the person is face to face with the reality, of course. So there are none of us without a trauma. So at some point in time, things will resurface, and it is okay. What's important also that we need to seek professionals who already know something in this area, right?
Yeah,
Who have done this therapy for quite some time, and not just looking for some people that have not done anything or just peers that want to take the same psychedelics as you just to see what happens. Because, well, like you love Jung so much, and Jung said that we also have to be beacons. We have to
yeah,
be the light for other people. The sole purpose of our existence is to be the light in the darkness of
darkness.
other
Yeah,
people's souls.
yes,
So,
and
what?
also I think that yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I
Yeah,
agree. I think that also in working with psychedelics, just like dreaming, like I always say to people, I'm not going into your psychedelic experience and rearranging the furniture and being your psychedelic shaman. what I'm doing is I'm creating a safe space. That's all I'm doing. It's like building furniture. And people who are presenting themselves as like shamans, or going into people's psychic space and moving things around and making them okay, that's
Yes.
nonsense. That's nonsense. What really heals people is empathy, and care. And and you don't need rattles, and you don't need to sing songs, you don't need to play instruments. You need to make people feel safe, and that you care about them, and that you're hearing what's going on with them, just like in therapy. And I feel like the huge advantage I've had in the work that I do is I got trained as a therapist, and I didn't have to pretend that it was me doing it, that it was my wisdom that was an insight that was gonna change things. That in fact it was gonna be my care for somebody and putting them in a safe space, and that's really all that you can do.
Absolutely. Now, Robert, how can people find you if they want to come to you?
Oh yeah, there's a couple great ways to reach me. I have a website that is www.thepsychedelicportal.com, and I also have podcasts. Like I've podcasts that they can find that's also called the Psychedelic Portal. So
Where they can find a well of information, I'm
yeah, there's
sure.
I have about, I think, 92 podcasts about psychedelics and consciousness and stuff like that. People will find, yeah, there's a lot of stuff on there that if people are interested, that they'll get a lot of great information.
Well, wonderful. I am so glad that we had this conversation today, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers have learned a lot. And so did I. So did I. It was very interesting and informative.
It was so fun, Yana. It was
Yes.
it's such a fun, rich conversation with you. I really enjoy it. You have a way about you that's intelligent and kind and generous that I really appreciate. I really appreciate being able to speak with you.
Thank you. It's empathy. It's empathy and kindness, perhaps. This is what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. We all need, there
Thank you.
needs to be more of that in the world.
Thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you for joining us today. And we have been live on United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, with Science and Paranormal, with Dr. Yana and Dr. Elliot, who is missing in action today, in fact, but he will be joining us next Tuesday. So join us next Tuesday for another fantastic conversation. And we're wishing you good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
That was so pleasurable. Bye.
Bye.